Dr. Zudhi Jasser is a physician in Phoenix, Arizona. He is a father, a husband, and the leading voice in the world as a Muslim about the terrible problem confronting Islam and the terrorism issue. This is a very courageous man, a man who has spoken forcefully since September 11th about the terrible problem, international problem of Islamic terrorism. It's a great honor to welcome to Without Notes Dr. Jasser.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
An honor.
Doctor, let's start, if we can, at the beginning, because there's so many fascinating contemporary topics to talk to. I want to set up for the audience a little bit about who you are and how you became who you are. So where were you born?
I was born in Ohio. My parents then moved to Louisiana for a few years. My father was trained at Tulane, and my mom got her master's there.
Now, maybe we should also tell the audience, where were your parents born?
Yeah, so my parents are from Syria.
Your parents are from Syria?
Yeah, they're political refugees from Syria.
Not a good piece of real estate currently.
No. When the revolution, as much as it kinetically went into overdrive in 2011, has been, as far as most of our families, going on for 50 plus years. And in 1963,
so what is going on today is just merely an eruption of something that's been brewing for 50 years.
I mean, Syria is basically the North Korea of the Middle East. It is a brutal, tyrannical regime that has ruled Syria in a fascist, nationalist military dictatorship since 1963. And in that year, my grandfather's business was nationalized. His newspaper was taken over. He was under house arrest for a few years. My father finished medical school and then escaped to Lebanon and waited to come here on political asylum. And in '67 they came here, and I was born a few years later.
Born in Ohio,
yeah.
Moved to Louisiana.
And my dad did his training in Tulane, and then they moved up to Wisconsin when I was 5. So really my memory of growing up is Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And your dad was a
cardiologist.
A cardiologist.
Yeah. And my mom's a pharmacist.
Okay.
My grandfather.
Now, when he came here, your mom and your dad, did they speak English?
My father spoke very good English. He was a writer and fluent in Arabic and English because he went to school in London.
Right.
My mom did not speak any English and learned here, took classes, and was able to then get a master's education at Tulane. My grandfather, Zudhi Jasser, who was under house arrest and a politician in Syria, had worked for democracy in the 40s and 50s. On my father's side, had been very active, and my mom's father was a Sharia court judge, more of a religious figure in Damascus, in the Supreme Court there, family court. So both of my grandparents come from a tradition of Islamic teachings and also democratic attempts at democratic governance.
Yes,
which
but
failed.
Unquestionably, family devoted to the Islamic faith.
Absolutely, and the interesting thing is, because my father was educated in London, he was a Anglophile. He just loved Western democracy, and his father loved it too. And they tried to bring some of those ideas into Syria, but because the military was just full of thugs and corrupt entities. I mean, one of the reasons, we'll talk in a minute, I'm sure, about why I joined the Navy was my dad told me and my grandparents that the reason America succeeds is the civilian government runs the military, and the military takes orders from our civilian government. In the Middle East, the military runs society and is a deep state that controls the society.
It's a very important delineation. Now, you're in Wisconsin, and you're growing up an Islamic family in Wisconsin. Where do you go to high school?
I went to junior high and high school in Neenah, Wisconsin, right south of Appleton and Green Bay, about 20 miles.
This sounds so all-American.
Yeah, there were 4 other Muslim families. I was the only Muslim in my high school. My parents and 3 other families built the first mosque in northeastern Wisconsin.
What is it that you want to do when you...
So my dad was a physician. But being active in mock trial and debate, I thought I wanted to do law.
Thought you wanted to be an attorney.
Yeah, I did. And then I spent some time with attorneys and realized that it was sort of 5%, just enjoyment, and 95% sort of just research and tedium. And from not that any offense to attorneys, but I wanted to have a profession that I could spend most of my time interacting with people. And so I went to medical school wanting to be a primary care doc and be a family doc from the beginning. So I was in part of what's called the Target M.D. program.
In part influenced by your father having
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
I think what made me follow in his footsteps as far as a physician is the fact that he never really told me to do that. I think had he told me to go into medicine, I probably would not have done it.
You've been a rock and roll singer.
Yeah, exactly. So he just sort of sat back. I actually also, in addition, wanted to be an attorney. At first, I was going to join the Navy because I've always been enamored with the American military. I definitely got that from my parents and my grandparents. But being a line officer is an amazing commitment, and I thought, well, let me go into medical school and see if I could do that route with the military.
So you go to medical school. Where do you go to medical school?
I went to undergrad, University of Wisconsin, and then medical school, Medical College of Wisconsin, a private school that used to be Marquette University in Milwaukee. And I was on a 7-year program, so I got accepted to medical school out of high school in a short program.
Now, if I can ask you a personal question, because I hear these stories of these unbelievable student loans that people... Did you pay for your own college education, or did your parents pay, or a little of both, or how did you do
Undergrad
that?
Was state school, so it wasn't as expensive. I had gotten accepted to Brown, but decided, listen, I don't want to spend that much. And so my parents paid for my undergraduate, but the medical school was on a Navy scholarship. So the taxpayers paid for all of my medical education. In exchange, I owed 4 years. I ended up serving 11 years.
So after medical school, you join the Navy.
Actually, you join, when you take your commission, you take it before you start medical school.
Oh, okay.
And then the summers you do what's called active duty training, so that you do officer training initially, and then rotations at Bethesda Naval, San Diego.
And as you enter the Navy, do you feel any overt or subtle discrimination or problem by virtue of your being a committed Muslim?
I have to tell you the fact, not at all. And even the fact that you'd asked me that, the family I came from, I never even went to the military thinking that that was going to be an issue. I went there because it was my country that I wanted to serve. Wearing the uniform, I mean, the pictures my parents would take, wanting to see me in uniform was something that, I mean, they abandoned their Syrian nationalism the moment they stepped on American soil. And
so this is a question, I have a very odd question in hindsight. If I had met your parents 5 years into their living in America, they're from Syria, they now live in Wisconsin. And I say to them, sir, if somehow, tomorrow, Syria and America were playing soccer, who, sir, would you root for? What would they say?
It would be a no-brainer that it would be America. And actually, that is a great question.
It is a great question.
It is a great question because
the ramifications to it are...
No, because not only that, if you go to the hookah bars and other places, I see a lot of my friends still cheering for the Syrian team.
Oh, no, I know it.
And what is the difference? It has to do with folks that come from families that are here for political asylum. The folks that come from families that are here for economic reasons, where they come to get an education and decide that the free market here gives them a ton more money than they could get in Syria, that's not an ideological move. That's simply for economics.
That's an economic move. So now, you join the American military. There is zero, from your perspective, zero sense of discrimination, being a minority faith. You're welcomed into the American military, treated like everyone else. What's your experience? Many people today don't know anyone who served in the American military. That's somewhat unfortunate. They don't even know anyone. What is it like? What do people who don't know anyone, have not served in the military, and don't know anyone who served in the military, what do they need to know?
It's interesting, as a doctor, I always compare the VA medical system to the military medical system that I trained in.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think it's similar because they're employed government doctors.
I would think.
Two completely different institutions. And no offense to the VA, but we know it's going under tons of reform now and needs reform. Mm-hmm. It's more like socialized medicine. Versus the military is, I have to tell you, one of the most professional, leadership-oriented, because people are there not because they're trying to get a paycheck, but most every one of my friends and colleagues who I still keep in contact with now are there because they wanted to serve their country. And many of us docs came from very expensive medical schools, so I was a resident in internal medicine at Bethesda with folks from Harvard, George Washington, expensive schools because they were scholarship students.
So I think what you're saying to me is that many of the people that you served with came from outstanding schools.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Could have basically written their ticket anywhere they wanted, and yet chose to serve in the American military.
Exactly, and you know the fact is that the spirit of what it means to be an American, I learned I was on a ship where supply officer was a Mormon, the deck lead officer was Jewish, our XO was Protestant, and my CO who I took care of was Catholic. We would have weekly discussions on faith, politics, and smoke a cigar.
Any atheists?
Yeah, I'm sure there was, but they weren't part of our religious conversations. And, you know, the interesting thing is I came from a family where my parents told me I just sort of organically did not have a chip on my shoulder.
Yes.
So when I went to the ship, they, you know, on my second week there, the administrative officer takes a picture of my ID without me seeing it, puts it around the ship and says, Arab terrorist on board, if found, report to the CO. And they were all worried that I found that hilarious. Hilarious. It was a joke. This is what officers do. And yet, so many people you tell that story to, and they're like, oh, you should have, you know,
sued them.
We should have sued them. I thought it was funny. Right. It's funny. Right. You know, if you don't have a chip on your shoulder and you're there because you're part of a team.
Well, but there's one other thing. You refer, and I think very wonderfully, as the chip on your shoulder. It sounds to me, as I'm listening to you, that your parents did not plant inside you and water the seed of victim mindset.
Yep, that's exactly it. Is that we are here as a gift. It is a privilege to be an American. We had more rights growing up in Wisconsin and joining the military that I grew up thinking I was an American that just happened to be Muslim, and that the government just gets out of my way so I can be myself. Versus most Muslims that are here saying, oh, we demand to be Americans and you're going to give us our right, by gosh. And that just doesn't endear somebody who feels, because the issue of family is not only your nuclear family, but do they feel like they're part of the national family, that this is their country? Instead, they're blaming America for everything and not taking ownership.
By the way, as you're talking to me, I cannot help but think what a horribly poor job our country has done in explaining to its young citizens what is unique and distinctive about America. So, for that part, that's worrisome. We do not teach young people today the unique, important, central, valuable uniqueness of the civilization. It's almost as if political correctness has removed that conversation from. America's a country. There's a lot of countries. We're just one.
The globalization thing is just, I can't tell you how toxic it is. And in the work we're doing now since 9/11, you know, you see these Muslims grow up and being pulled into something that they would die for. And the natural process for me to do what the work I'm doing to reform the Islamic teachings that are doing that comes from a sense that the only thing I would ever die for is America. Because America is not a land mass, it's an idea.
You're in the American military, you spend a total of 11 years. What's your highest rank?
Lieutenant Commander.
You become a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. And after 11 years, what do you decide to do next?
So after I did my training at Bethesda, part of it was interrupted by serving on the USS El Paso. We deployed to Somalia in Operation Restore Hope, which had a huge impact on me because it was an operational tour, and which allowed me to join the VFW.
You served in Somalia.
Served in Somalia. Then I was chief resident at Bethesda. And my last tour was as a physician to Congress for 2+ years.
So you were one of the doctors in charge of caring for the congressmen and women?
Yeah, so 545 members of Congress and the 9 Supreme Court justices, our office that included me and another junior internist and the Admiral.
How did this...
I know, it was just, I wish my grandfather had been alive. That was, if I did nothing else in my life, that was...
Did your father get to see this?
Oh, absolutely. He came to, and I got a meritorious service medal at the end of that tour because there was a shooting that happened. You may remember Russell Weston Jr. shot his way into Tom DeLay's office, killing 3 Capitol Hill officers and Tom DeLay's security guard in the rotunda, which caused the entire creation of the visitor center and the security perimeter. Our medical office was right near that, and we were 911 response for that, and we tried to save the lives of the 3 that were killed.
Okay.
And
so
that
now,
was on July
after serving,
1998.
after caring for congressmen and women and Supreme Court justices, then what happens?
So then my father had been now in practice in Arizona. My parents moved to Arizona.
Oh, they moved to Arizona. Okay.
Yeah.
Why did they pick Arizona?
Part of it's weather, part of it's the opportunity in Phoenix for my dad, who had a specialty in nuclear cardiology, to join a large cardiac academic practice in Phoenix. So after I finished, his partner was nearing retirement. They had a large primary care element to their practice, so it was natural for and after having served in Congress, I was sort of at that halfway point, 11 years. You either do 20 years and retire, or, decide to leave. And it was an opportunity for me to join my dad, which was just an irreplaceable experience.
And how old was your dad at that time?
He was 60. So,
so you became a junior partner. What was your relationship like with your father and your mother? Were they more stoic people?
No, they're the typical Arabic, Mediterranean, be it Greek, Italian personality is very emotional, very a lot
but he had a hands-off approach with you in terms of who you were as an individual.
He really did. He was in many ways my hero. I feel like the fact that they left Syria was, as tough as it was for him, a blessing for me, and he taught me what to appreciate, what not to, to work hard, the work ethic that he had.
So now you joined the practice. Then what happens?
So I took over the primary care aspect of the practice, and basically my wife, the most important part of my life we didn't talk about was I had met my wife in 1998 while I was still in the Navy.
You were in the Navy. How old were you?
I was 30 years old.
You were 30 years old,
yeah. And
you met your wife when you were in the Navy. How do you meet your wife?
My cousin was doing his cardiology fellowship at Cleveland Clinic and knew her father very well, and very traditional Muslim way of meeting.
And she's
had
Muslim?
A blind date. She's Muslim.
You met on a blind date?
We did. So I
now,
flew
what
into
is
Cleveland.
a Muslim blind date like?
It's the pejorative.
It doesn't have anything to do with Tinder? Or?
No. The pejorative is that people think we have arranged marriages. No, it's just people you trust in your family introduce you.
Yeah.
And we met.
Okay.
In my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, I talk about years of looking for the right person. When I met Gada.
Were you relatively sure when you met her early on that she might well be the right one?
I was so sure that I actually met her and then did not call her back for like 2 years, which sounds stupid. It was the stupidest thing.
It sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, the
I don't
stupidest
know
thing
if
I've ever done in my life.
Okay.
But
So
I knew
you
this was
meet
the right
her.
girl. Yeah.
You meet her. You have a terrific night.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, weekend. I spent 2 days with her and her family.
You
And
had a terrific time. And you're telling me that the next couple of days you didn't call her?
I gave her my military email, which I guess I wrote wrong, and she tried to communicate with me, and I never got that communication. And then I just
And
said,
you didn't follow up.
She was so wonderful, so compassionate. I thought, gosh, I can't keep communicating with this girl unless I'm sure this is, unless, you know, I don't want to hurt her.
And you had no contact with her for 2 years?
2 years.
How old was she? You were 30.
She was 23.
23 years
Yeah.
old. And you had no contact with her?
No.
None. Well, this is a high-risk strategy, doctor.
It wasn't a strategy. It was idiocy. It was immaturity.
It was immaturity.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
And 2 years later, still in the Navy.
You're 32 years old. It's 2 years later. You haven't talked to this woman in 2 years. Presumably you had done some dating. Presumably she had done some dating. Then what happens?
I called her back.
You picked
and
up
I
the
said,
phone.
remember me?
Yeah.
She said, yeah.
Yeah.
I said, would you still consider meeting me again? And you know, I told her.
Did she say what happened?
Yeah, she did.
And you had no. How did you answer?
I said, you know, I just wasn't ready.
I just wasn't ready.
I didn't want to.
Which, by the way, is a very vulnerable answer.
Yeah.
I just wasn't ready. And anyway, you asked to see her. You saw her again.
Yep.
Then what happened?
Then I saw her almost every weekend for a few months, and asked her to marry me. And
after how long?
Probably 3-4 months of dating.
Now that strikes, I think, I know it strikes me, but I think it would strike most Americans as awfully quick. Is that more common in a kind of traditional Muslim?
Yeah, I think it's a conservative Muslim approach in that dating is not something to be done casually. It's a respectful, equal relationship in folks that are courting for marriage.
So
and that if you're serious, you either decide to get married or you don't. It's not a casual thing that's done disrespectfully.
And after this 4-month period, you ask her to marry. She agrees?
She did. She did. It was on Thanksgiving then that we had our
engagement. And she is at
Case Western.
25?
Yeah,
26?
24.
24. Where do you get married?
In Phoenix. So we flew into Phoenix, got married in my military gear. And my admiral from Congress had come in for the wedding. A couple members of Congress that I took care of were there.
Did her parents have similar views about America as your parents? Gratitude, those type of feelings? Similar. It doesn't have to be
it's
identical.
Close. It really was. She certainly did. You know, I remember doing the blind dating thing for 10 years. And some families I'd walk in and they got pictures of themselves and Bashar Assad, and I'd be in the house for 5 minutes and couldn't find a way to get out of there faster than Flint.
I'm imagining that when you walk into a home and you see a photograph of a family member with Assad, that the only equivalent thing for an American mind would be to see a picture of Hitler or Saddam Hussein. Is that emotionally about?
That's the way my family viewed it. And the amazing thing to me is I would quickly jump to the chase and ask him, well, what is this?
Well, what's this?
And he'd be like, oh, this was the Arab medical group. When we went to Damascus, the government took a picture. We're not politically involved. And most of the Syrians, this is what's so odd to me, and I could never understand, is the Cuban American community, for example, you never see them. They're very anti-Castro.
Very.
And yet for decades, the Syrian American community, up until the revolution, 1 out of 9 were actually working intelligence for the Assad regime. And many, because they wanted to travel back and forth, that's the excuse they gave, would actually be sympathetic to the regime and even sometimes vote in their elections.
One possible answer to what you just said, it's outrageous, is, look, Michael, you offer people money, they'll do just about anything for money.
A lot of it's economic.
A lot of it's economic.
Yep, they have houses there, because you lose all your economics if you're against the regime.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, one of the things which my grandfather taught me, anyone of any significant wealth since 1963 in Syria has some connection to the regime. There's no, it's a socialist, oppressive environment.
The thing that people must assess as they're thinking about these topics, it's very hard in the comfort of an air-conditioned American home to think about what they would do if they were in a similar setting. a starving dog will eat a lot of things. That if you're hungry enough and you're scared enough, you'll do a lot of things that you wouldn't normally do.
I mean, I wish my parents, though, were alive, my dad and my grandparents, to see the revolution that finally happened. Because when my parents left their nationalism of Syria, they didn't only leave it, they said, the hell with it. Mm-hmm. They said,
that's why I asked you the
this people deserves the government they have, because they're wondering, tons of the folks that tried to reform ended up in prison, ended up tortured. Brothers reported on other brothers. Mm-hmm. So the tribal system, and now we see what's happening in this revolution, has been hijacked by radical Islamists.
Name some of the was Senator McCain, was Lindsey Graham, was Donald Trump. Give me who got it right from your perspective?
House Representative Adam Kinzinger really gets it right on Syria.
Where's Adam Kinzinger from?
He's Illinois congressman.
Illinois congressman.
Senator Kirk,
is he a Republican or a Democrat?
He's a Republican.
Republican. All right, go ahead. Give me.
Lindsey Graham had it right from a foreign policy perspective.
Any Democrats in the group?
I wanted to say Senator Lieberman, but he's not even a senator anymore.
No, he isn't. No.
He used to get it right all the time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I cannot think of any forward-thinking Democrats. This is not a partisan issue. We have bipartisan involvement in the work I do.
I'm asking you, listen, I don't know what you're going to say to me, and I'm asking you sincerely. Best you can recall, how did the Secretary of the State of the United States of America, Hillary Clinton, how did she call this opportunity? Did she get it right or wrong?
And if I can take 1 second before we get to Hillary and Kerry, there are many Republicans who got it wrong too.
Yes.
I mean, be it the sort of isolationist Trump approach, which is not isolationist in that he's aggressive against ISIS and stuff like that, but a little too sympathetic to dictators, or the.
By the way, I think psychologically I can understand that sympathy to dictators, but that's another topic for another time.
Or the Republican approach, which includes a sympathy to oil money. Which I see sometimes too much from Senator McCain and some of the others that give a little too much lip service to some of the old guard in the Middle East that are fighting Al-Qaeda with us. But more importantly, I think if you look at Secretary Kerry and Clinton, these are folks that Hillary was calling Assad a reformer in 2005 and 6. And then, as a secretary, she sort of backpedaled that and claimed to be with the rebellion, and yet was the person who really oversaw the time initially when if our policy had been right, it would have shifted the rebellion in a different direction.
So from your perspective, your informed perspective, history isn't going to be kind on this topic to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State John Kerry, former President Barack Obama. Is that all true?
Absolutely. I mean, here you have Samantha Power, the ambassador to the UN, who literally, Michael, wrote the book on genocide. She wrote a book on genocide, how it would never happen again. And yet in Syria, her president, our president, talked about red lines that meant nothing. Now you're hearing them all inflamed about Putin's influence, when in fact it was this president that told Putin, wait till after the elections and I'll work with you, and allowed Syria to become a client state of Iran. And we learned from the New York Times piece that it was Ben Rhodes, the amateur in foreign policy, who basically put everything in the Middle East at the altar of that nuclear deal.
Right. But I want to be fair. You are certainly giving prominent Democrats very, very poor grades around this topic. But you are not reluctant to give many Republicans pretty poor marks as well. Is that a fair?
We talked to Congressman Kinzinger's office, and he was on ABC this week saying that he was trying, the White House passive-aggressively asked for congressional approval to do air operations for a no-fly zone to punish the Assad regime for use of chemical weapons over 20 times. When they had crossed that red line, and they passive-aggressively said they can't get support. And Kinzinger and 6 other members of Congress said, you know what, we can't even get Republicans to agree. So this is the problem, is that it was bipartisan, where the Republicans wanted to set up Obama for failure, and they said because of the failures in Iraq, and they blamed him for the failures, when in fact, when he asked for aggressive approval, they didn't give it to him.
Okay, so now you have this organization that has existed for 15 years. Talk to the audience about its mission. Talk to them. What is its name? What is its mission? How do people interested in it learn more? How do they agree with you or disagree with you or engage you? Talk about that.
Well, I think, people need to realize that every journey starts with the first few steps,
Yep.
and the Islamic
And those can be
faith,
rocky steps.
they can. And but no journey. I mean, even our own. If you look at Europe's path through democracy, it had a setback to severe fascism in the early 20th century that it then defeated again. And I think the Islamic history right now, there is no greater place to set the direction better than in America. There might only be 4 million Muslims here, but I think we have an ability in this laboratory to do things. And our American Islamic Forum for Democracy.
That's the name of the organization.
Yeah.
Do it one more time.
American Islamic Forum for Democracy, AIFD.
Okay.
Our website is aifdemocracy.org.
Okay.
And our mission is to develop a Muslim identity outside the mosque. Right now, only 12% of American Muslims attend mosque regularly. Islam, similar to Judaism, doesn't have a central authority. It's a very decentralized faith.
There's no pope.
There's no pope. It's just a very personal faith.
Mm-hmm.
Some people go to mosque, some don't. And in America, because many of us reject the clerical establishment, don't go to mosque, not because we're not faithful, but we just reject the establishment, and they haven't yet organized. If anything, our greatest asset is our greatest liability, which is the Muslims we're reaching out to don't want to organize under the Islamic banner because they're not Islamists, so it's hard to unify them, and that's our mission.
Doctor, I heard you say something that I can't repeat it exactly, I don't recall it, but it was very powerful, almost had a profound bumper sticker like impact on me when you said, I am an American.
The
say
mantra,
it for me.
I'm an American that happens to be Muslim, not a Muslim that demands to be American. And the hyphenated American thing, I learned from reading Elijah Izbegovic, a president of Bosnia, was in prison under Tito for 15 years. Solitary confinement. And he said when all he had was 4 walls, the only thing he had left was God. And he realized that to be a human being is to create poetry and music and be alive, things that animals can't do. We do as human beings, and our government gives us the space to do that. He said your faith with God, actually, you'll have no matter what happens to you. So therefore, the Islamic State should be dead. We don't need an Islamic State. We need a state that protects individuals. So I'm an American that happens to be Muslim or Jewish or I happen to be Muslim. But Muslims that come here to collectivize and demand their rights, that's not what America's about. It's not about enclaves and ghettoization. It's about our American family that's diverse ideologically as well as ethnically.
Doctor, we have just experienced this most unusual election. I don't know how history is going to record any of this, but it's all so fascinating. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I rather doubt you have. Can you give me some impressions from your perspective of some of the positive, negative, neutral, concerning feelings that you have regarding President Trump and what is... I understand that it's so unprecedented, it's almost hard to predict what will happen, but talk about some areas of support and some areas of concern, and tell me.
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, I get it that his ability and his sense that people that like him to see that he just says it as it is, whatever that might be, as dysfunctional as he might say it.
But you do not only get it, you actually do understand and affirm that political correctness is not merely amusingly pathetic, it is dangerous.
Not only dangerous, if you say, Zudhi, you've been around for 15 years, why haven't you gotten traction? I would tell you that political correctness, the suffocation of the vocabulary of what we are fighting, has been my biggest obstacle. Because if you all in America would actually call this Islamic terrorism, I would have had more traction in what I'm doing.
You have had traction. You've been on national television on average of 5 or 6 times a week. Now that's 5 or 6 times more
within
than
the Muslim community.
Well, fair, within the Muslim community.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. So you talk more about your feelings, concerns, support, antagonism toward President Trump.
Well, so his say it as it is great. It's getting us attention to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Islamic radicalism, etc. I think ultimately, though, we need a strategy. And I think what he's proven, what Peter Drucker quote famously as saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So he's proving that culture can bypass all the strategic thinking from theologians, from politicians, from policymakers.
It would appear that he is going to, at least in his public statements, which you don't know which ones to regard as serious or not, double down on the kill it, burn it out, where kind of like a double down version of Bush.
Right.
Does that seem to be what you're sensing he's...
And not only that, I think by him identifying it as Islamic radicalism and talking about the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror organization and exposing
good?
that...
When you heard that at the inauguration, when the President of the United States said on his inaugural speech the words Islamic terror, and he said it ferociously. He didn't say it as if he were, playing cards at an old age home. He said it very strongly. It had a lot of... I remember the President Reagan tear down that wall. There was a strength to it. Did that make you feel good or bad or concerned or what?
It made me feel good. I can tell you, it reminded me of the patient that was in Egypt. I've had patients I translated for that come here to America to get treated. In Egypt, they go to that clinic to get treated. They come here and we tell them, oh, you have cancer. They're like, you didn't know that? No, they told me I had some kind of growth. And they never told me I had cancer. So finally, he's diagnosing it. Right. That you have a cancer and we need to treat it.
And talk about, from your perspective, this 12-step approach.
Yeah.
Everybody watching this knows somebody. A family member, a relative, a brother or sister, a lover, who's been to an AA meeting. Mm-hmm. And they know about denial. Talk about the 12-step approach.
This is the issue, is that in order to go down this pathway of reform, we have to acknowledge that ISIS doesn't come out of thin air. That the chop
and
shops...
it's not a mere misunderstanding.
No, that the laws in Saudi Arabia that behead those who question Islam, the laws in Pakistan that imprison blasphemers, that kill apostates, that tell women they can't go to school.
Have more people been beheaded in Saudi Arabia than by ISIS?
In the last 6 months, exactly.
Say it one more time.
So in the last 6 months, the Saudi government has overseen the beheading of almost over 100 individuals, while ISIS, which we think is the beheading evil, which it is, the Saudi government does it routinely as part of its punishment process in their Islamic courts. And these are our allies against the enemy. So they're the firefighters and the arsonists.
That's a stunning remark. They're the firefighters and the arsonists.
So they're in denial. We're in denial to think that they're helping us. Muslims are in denial to say that this government that's spending billions on their information operation. If you look at translations of the Quran around the world, most of it, 90% plus, is from Saudi interpretations. Our modern interpretations are not read.
Doctor, Americans don't know much about the Middle East other than it's a really, really, really bad neighborhood.
No.
Right? And I think there are a bunch of rich folks over there. What gives with Saudi Arabia? What's the deal? They got a lot of oil, a lot of money. I hear stories of their schools teaching young people that Jews are apes, yet they're our friends, they're not our friends. What the hell's the deal?
You know, if you listen to my grandfather, he would have said, you take a desert rat tribe that wasn't much and you hand them billions of oil to them, thieving it from the property rights of the rest of the Saudi population. This is what you get. They take a movement of Ibn Abdul Wahhab from the mid-19th century, and you jet propulse it from simply a tribe in Saudi Arabia to now global influence because of billions of oil money.
Why? What would propel the leaders of Saudi Arabia, presumably our allies, to either endorse or give in to this level of extremism? Is it a buy-off to certain factions of what's the deal?
They have this cycle that they've created since the late 70s, in which a radical terror group, the Wahhabis, took over the mosque, and they came up to an agreement. They said, you guys can have the educational system and the judiciary if you leave our government and military alone.